Welcome to the TTS Talking Educators podcast. Each week, we'll be joined by educational experts from across the globe, offering exclusive insights, inspiration and guidance to help practitioners unlock the potential for learning in the early years and primary settings. Hello, my name is Mark Loveday, your host for this week's TTS Talking Educators podcast. I'm the headmaster of Frewham College, an independent co-educational day and boarding school for students aged 7 to 19, specialising in dyslexia and co-occurring specific learning difficulties. I'm a specialist teacher, an SLE specialist leader of education for SEN, and have taught across primary, secondary and sixth form in both mainstream and specialist settings, holding a variety of leadership roles. I have previously set up and led SEN advisory teaching services, been responsible for the creation of diagnostic pathways for dyslexia, dyscalculia and dyspraxia, and created and led an alternative provision for students experiencing emotional-based school avoidance, which won Alternative Provision of the Year in 2023. I'm a board director for the SBLD Assessment Standards Committee, known as SASC, a trustee of a multi-academy trust, and I'm a national and international speaker. Throughout the series, we'll be discussing a range of topics aimed at supporting SEN in primary settings, inspiring you with guidance and resources to enhance your practice. I'm delighted to welcome back Michael Surr as today's guest. Welcome back, Michael. How are you on this? Well, it's rather grey and cloudy today.
Well, I'm all good, thank you, but it is sunny where I am.
Okay, it's the weather is grey down south, so hopefully we might get some of that sunshine passing down. But before we get started, could you just do a quick introduction and recap about yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, sure. So I'm head of education at NASEN, which is the National Association for Special Educational Needs. We're a charity and a membership organisation. My background is in primary teaching. And I have also been a SENCO and a deputy head as well. I've worked as a SEN advisory teacher for a local authority, which meant that I was able to also then work in secondary and also some experience in early years and further education as well. And my work at NASEN is to oversee the work of the education team.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. In this episode, we'll be learning about the SEN support and also those kind of challenges and the barriers that go with that. So leading on quite nicely from our previous episode. So I think the big one that's probably out there, we picked up on a little bit last episode, Michael, around this idea that we know out in our schools there's a lot of really good inclusive practice happening. But we also know that a lot of our schools are up against it in terms of funding and increased need. So could we start off by just unpicking really that kind of funding stream that schools have and how they can get the most from it and kind of have an effective SEN support program within their school?
Yeah, I just want to, before launching into that specifically, it's just to clarify what we mean by SEN support. So potentially unhelpfully, in the SEN code of practice, we have children and young people who are receiving or have an education, health and care plan. And then we have others who also have SEN, and that provision is made through what is called SEN support. So when we talk about SEN support, it's important that we're clear, are we meaning provision generally, which can happen at SEN support level, but also as part of an education, health and care plan? Or are we talking about the category, for want of a better word, of SEN support? So those children with SEN without an education, health and care plan. And I think that it is potentially unhelpful that one of the sort of levels of provision is called SEN support, because yeah, absolutely. It can make it sound that, if you don't have an education, health and care plan, your child won't have their needs met. So to come back to your question. I don't think any school has ever said that they couldn't use more money.
Yeah.
I think that would always be the case.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that, particularly at the moment, budgets are extremely stretched, very much so. So for me, I think one of the main considerations is that we are using a rigorous process of provision management, often called provision mapping. But again, I think that's not a helpful title to use, because a provision map is just the result of your management of provision. And as part of that strategic approach and rigorous approach to provision management, you should be evaluating the effectiveness of your provision to make sure that you're seeing the results from it, not only for individual children, but also in terms of any patterns or trends. So does it work? Does a particular provision or intervention work more effectively for some children than it does for others? So what are the patterns there? And then as part of that, unfortunately, we do also have to be considering value for money as part of that. So if you do have two interventions that have similar impact in similar areas, if one is much more expensive than the other, then decisions need to be made about whether or not you continue the more expensive one. So it is about that strategic approach to monitoring and reviewing your provision within school.
Absolutely. I think that's really helpful to clarify what we mean by sensible at the beginning. So thank you for that, because I think, that language is important. And, so many parents going down the route of potentially a parental application for EHCP, very much often based on the fact that they don't feel their child's going to get the support without either EHCP or indeed, a label, which really kind of brings us on to the next element, really, around this idea of a label versus support, and the fact that actually, schools can be putting support in without the label, but equally, obviously, the older the student gets in terms of, Equality Act, etc., and workplace, university, a label becomes really important.
Yeah. For me, the sort of discussion around needs versus labels is quite an interesting one. And I just want to clarify initially that whatever I'm about to say, I'm not saying that labels or diagnoses aren't important, because they are. But what they shouldn't be is, as you said, Mark, a barrier to provision. So where a child doesn't have a formal identification of a need in the form of a diagnosis, that doesn't mean that needs aren't potentially there and can't be met. So for me, it's about seeing the child in front of you, the needs in front of you. And I think that's also potentially helpful for teachers as well. There are so many different diagnoses. There are the more common ones, if you like, dyslexia, ADHD, and so on, autism. But there are also lots and lots of other diagnoses as well. And it would be extremely difficult for class and subject teachers, let alone SENCOs, to have knowledge of all of those different diagnoses. So it's about looking at the child in front of you and thinking, what is it that they're finding particularly difficult, and what can I do to address that and to support that child? Is there anything in terms of provision I can make, or utilising different approaches and strategies? But also, is there anything about my classroom practice that is potentially unhelpful. And so is there anything I can do to remove that particular barrier? There's a saying that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. So that to me reinforces that need to get to know our children and young people as individuals. So diagnosis is important. It's useful. It can be, obviously not always, but there can be a sense of relief sometimes when a child or young person gets a diagnosis, because it explains certain things that may have been causing concern or confusion or sometimes guilt for parents.
But and both, jumping in there, both from the parents' point of view as well as the child, to help them understand why. For example,
absolutely.
I might find reading challenging, and I'm not keeping up with my peers, or I'm on a different book band in primary school. It is that balance, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think, linking into kind of the next thing really is around that kind of confidence from teachers. And at what point, I suppose, when we come to kind of balancing those books again in terms of schools and budgets, at what point we're calling those external professionals in as well for advice and that upskilling. But if we start thinking about our new teachers coming through, we know nationally we've got a massive recruitment drive for more teachers. But actually, what are we getting in terms of high quality SEN input in terms of our initial teacher training?
To be honest, I think that's quite a mixed picture. So there will be some training providers who have quite a rigorous approach to SEND and build it into all, or most, if not all of what they're teaching. Whereas other providers might have just one module. Which could be seen as, right, that's it, we've covered SEND. But for those providers who tend to build SEND more holistically across the whole piece, it's about providing it's an overview of different types of need, because you're not, as I've already alluded to, you're not going to be able to cover every single type of need. But it's about awareness raising. It's about particular needs, but it's also about referring back to what I said before about how we teach. It's about making sure that there's understanding of what is inclusive practice and what could potentially be difficult for some children and young people. There are lots of different resources available out there. So blowing our own trumpet, if you like.
Please do.
We have lots of resources that are free to access. And Whole School SEND, which is part of NASEN, has lots of resources, including resources that you can download, but also online SEN CPD learning modules that offer bite-sized learning about all different aspects of SEND.
Brilliant. And I think you pick up on the NASEN website is fantastic in terms of the resources that are on there, and a really good starting point, including kind of the Whole School SEND auditing tool, as well as a starting point for any new SENCOs or heads looking at auditing their school. I think just picking up on that trend coming through in terms of that mixed support that is out there in terms of ITT. I mean, prior to coming into my current post, I did a lot of work with teacher training with one of the universities in my previous role, and I have to say they did it extremely well, and it had a really good partnership between special school. This is a special school and them as a university, and it was brilliant in terms of the input. But there's never enough time to cover everything. But they really did have a well-rounded overview. But thinking of those teachers coming in, I think it's really important that as schools, as you point out in terms of the nascent CPD, that bite-sized CPD, that we recognise that just making a statement that every teacher is a teacher of a child with SEND is not going to make them a teacher of a child with SEND. We've got to invest in that. We've got to invest in high quality CPD and be thinking about how we're targeting that CPD as well as indeed kind of that signposting. Thinking about that challenge, how do we balance that need across our schools? There is no secret outcome, there's no secret recipe, but how do we try and balance that across our schools?
Ooh, that's we haven't got an awful lot longer left in this session. That it is a difficult one, but I think you've referenced review tools, so that those are tools that can be used to. There's a whole school review tool, but there are also there's a reflective framework for individual class and subject teachers that will help them to reflect, clues in the title, on their own confidence levels and their own knowledge. So that could be a useful starting point for identifying what areas of CPD are needed. And again, it comes back to, for me, provision management. Part of that should also be identifying needs amongst your staff and making sure that CPD is targeted appropriately. There's also, so I know some schools utilise SEND champions, so in different departments or phases. So that gives another person that teachers can go to in addition to the SENCO, because SENCOs are incredibly busy, and we'll hear more about that in a different session, I think. But it just helps to disseminate that specialism and that knowledge. So it's making sure that those things are in place, that there's good understanding of staff CPD needs, but also then that there are different models of support, SEND champions being just one.
That's a really, really good place to end. I think SEND champions, in a way, it's done well. It works exceptionally well across the whole school, and also not only from a whole school buy-in point of view, but also that whole idea of developing CPD and community of practice within schools. I think a couple of takeaways from there really is the amount of free resources that are available on the NASEN and whole school SEND website, and we can put that link in. And also thinking about kind of resourcing. I know TTS, for example, have an awful lot of blogs, resource reviews around how you can build inclusive classrooms without spending an awful lot of money. But thank you, Michael, for joining us again and sharing those really valuable insights. You've been listening to the TTS Talking Educators podcast with me, Mark Loveday, and Michael Surr. If you've been inspired by our conversation today, don't forget you can sign up via the link in our episode notes to be the first to hear about future episodes and access exclusive follow-up content, including ideas for your settings and links to the relevant resources.